Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shameer and some of fintech's hardest hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome in everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. We're joined by Iain Russell, Head of Performance Marketing at MoneyHub. Iain, thanks for coming along today.
Hey Shameer, yeah, pleasure to be here.
Iain, tell us a little bit about yourself in your journey so far.
If we go back to sort of like the start of what I call my direct marketing journey, a few years after university, 2008, I joined a sort of media magazine company based in Bath, working in their subscriptions team. I was managing a portfolio of magazines, building customer growth, building a subscription base. As that career developed, I started taking on more responsibility. Towards the end of 2010, the way I always like to describe it is the iPad descended from the heavens to save the future of publishing. We all know it didn't quite work out that way, but at the time, this was the big thing. So I was essentially marketing port of call within the business at that time as part of a project to get all of our magazines onto the iPad, Amazon Kindle and Google Newsstand at the time on Android tablets. So that was upwards of 80 individual magazine apps. It was a really exciting time. And even with Apple Newsstand, we got into a position when that launched for Apple. Globally, we had more than half the market share of Apple Newsstand just from our company, the company magazines. We had only over half the magazines that were available. And that was kind of the first drop into the world of mobile marketing, app marketing. And, I've loved it. I loved it ever since. Crazy world, very fast moving, things changing all the time. I always remember Apple telling us that push notifications can be used for no marketing of any kind at that point, which was hilarious because it was like, what are you talking about? How do you think this is even going to, perform? For me, it was a fantastic new marketing channel and means of communications to our users. So of course it was going to be used for marketing. My time sort of developed there. It didn't save the future of publishing. We grew revenues of digital editions sort of up to £4 million after a year, which we were really pleased with, but that didn't offset the reduction in print revenues that were being seen in the industry as a whole. So when things were scaling down, it was time to, move on to the next challenge. And sort of been in and out of a few areas. I've worked at a health tech startup, even done a bit of time at like a big retail bank and their digital customer support team. But a year there was enough for me for that. It was so slow moving and I couldn't get anything done that I wanted to get done. That wasn't for me. And I really found that I like working in fast moving startups. And I actually first joined MoneyHub back in 2016. It was only for 7 months at that time because it was a first foray into direct to consumer app. But as a wider technology business, it needed to focus on elements of the B2B proposition, which completely made sense. So that's when I moved on for a couple of other roles. And then in January 2020, I had a call from the COO who said that, they got back into a position ready for growth and they really wanted to drive the consumer app again. And they wanted to see if I was available. And I just happened to be in between roles at the time. So it was perfect timing. So I rejoined the company in January 2020 as head of performance marketing. And that is still what I'm doing today.
I was always impressed by MoneyHub's activity in terms of, you're pretty ubiquitous with your activity and pretty much on every channel and that you could possibly think of. And I was astonished when I found out actually it was just yourself looking after pretty much all of the paid activity at MoneyHub because it's, it was quite a machine. You got MoneyHub into the top 10 apps without any paid budget to begin with. It'd be great to hear about how you managed to achieve that and kind of what that playbook looked like. And then also kind of dig into, I suppose, your approach to almost like building out the strategy for MoneyHub?
Getting into the top 10 finance apps, still one of the most proud moments. It was the 2016, before the heady days of Apple search ads arrived. Really, that was through, we all do this now, and it sounds so obvious, but it's a lot of the ASO, the App Store optimization side of things, and getting the basics in place. So simple things like, okay, what's the website saying? What message is that portraying? What are the social media channels saying? Are we all singing off the same hymn sheet, so to speak? So making sure that all of that was in sync, and then looking at the App Store pages themselves, making sure that the description was coherent, good app title, subtitle, keywords, getting those screenshots updated, taking that time to focus on putting those basics in place. So what I tend to, like the owned channels and what you can do organically, just really helped drive that visibility. And I feel that, like, reflecting back on it, I think we just caught a wave at the right time in terms of how the Apple App Store algorithm was working at the time. So the velocity of downloads that we started to get organically, and as we developed and improved what we were doing, like internally, just helped keep improving that velocity. And you feel it's a bit of a black box, we know, and it's who knows now. It's really competitive space. We just steadily saw that growth go up and the downloads increase. And as we get higher up in the charts, you got more visibility. So then you get more organic downloads. So it was a real sort of testament to putting those basic principles in place, that I'd say, and stuff that I'd done before with magazine apps. I took a lot of learning through into that to get those basics in place before then looking to start layering on some of the paid activity. And actually, even thinking about it now, I remember pre-registering interest for Apple search ads. So in the world of Apple, who knows? Maybe that helped the algorithm put it up a bit more. Oh, you said you might be interested in spending some more money with us. Let's push you up. Yeah. Let's push you up in the charts.
Ad platforms don't do anything underhanded like that at all.
No, not at all.
I've got whole conspiracy theories about these. I genuinely think that sometimes that they don't push up quality scores on particular keywords just because they want to charge you more on particular keywords. There's no hard evidence, but then,
it would be hard to argue with you on that.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So let's fast forward to sort of like 2020 when you sort of like came back to the point when MoneyHub wanted to start scaling. One thing I know is that you've not been in the position where you've been able to just throw money at the problem to drive app downloads and driving users. And you've been very, very diligent with the way that you apply budget. And there's a phrase that you refer to as boxing clever. Can you kind of talk me through that and what you mean by that?
Boxing clever is almost like knowing where to place your bets with the limited budget that you have, not diving in head first on all the channels all at once, having an understanding and starting at fairly low levels in some areas as well. Apple search ads was the most obvious, like, first paid channel for me to step in with, just from previous experience, but also the general setup organically of where downloads were coming from. Apple was still strong contender. And you've got what I would, term as like a tier one platform there. You're on the device already, and you've got the opportunity when people are searching for certain terms to surface your app there for an instant download. So it makes a ton of sense to start there. But then what also was really important for me was to make sure that the tech stack was in place. So having a mobile measurement provider in the ground floor ready to look at those sort of top funnel metrics that you've got and knowing what's important to you when you're getting your new downloads and what represents a good sort of quality of acquisition. Because I've seen it many times where people chase install volume as like a vanity metric without having a solid understanding of the quality. It's just, from my experience, a complete waste of time. So for us at MoneyHub, the principle of like open banking and open finance connections to see everything in one place, you're not going to get the value of the product or be able to start playing around with the tools until you connect your first account within MoneyHub. So That's a key, first task after registration that we want to drive people to. So then when I start looking at other channels, I can look at the effective cost per registration, the effective cost per connection. That was able to show me at times. One example I always remember when I was then started to layer on a bit of Facebook testing and a bit of Twitter ad testing was that Facebook would be by far the cheapest channel to get installs at that time. But when I dug into those sort of top funnel metrics, it was Twitter that was giving me the better quality of user and effective cost per first time connection, so that when more budget was made available or in certain months I could drive a bit more activity, I knew that that was the lever to pull, that I could go back and I'm going to put more on Twitter ads, because even on the face of it, that install looked more costly. I knew I was going to be getting a better quality of user.
Here's a question that's probably circling the mind of a few listeners. Why not put all your budget into Twitter if you know that was performing the best?
A common mistake, I think, is that saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You become really overly reliant then on that channel. And if it starts to diminish, you don't know where to go next. If it suddenly decides to have a complete meltdown or a blackout, I mean, Twitter did recently, didn't it? Who knows what Elon's doing? Then you've got a massive hole in your acquisition pipeline. Now we're getting no users in. So I think it's always key to have some other experimentation going on at the same time. Like I said, Apple Search Ads was an obvious one, and that's probably the one channel that I made sure to run continuously, and then maybe budget sort of up and down every now and then to allow for some testing in other areas. But I think it's key to have that variation. And then the other argument against that as well is that you might think if you're only using one channel, then you don't really need to worry about having a mobile measurement provider that can aggregate all your channels in one place, which is the other obstacle that you come up against, is that then you're reliant on the likes of Twitter telling you how good Twitter are doing on their dashboards, or Facebook Meta telling you how good they're doing on their own dashboards, even Apple Search Ads as well. And so by having that independent view, as I like to call it, that gives you that sort of true representation of what's happening on each channel, really helped me identify then where I need to place bets in the future and help layer on those extra sort of avenues to growth.
I mean, ad platforms are great at telling you how great they are and how they're doing all the heavy lifting, right? When even Google Analytics is great at telling you how great Google is. But I do find like in certain instances that almost like selfish behavior of the individual ad platforms analytics can actually be quite useful. So, if you've got Facebook almost like attributing almost every conversion you're actually seeing from, let's say, Google, as one of their conversions, I think the benefit is knowing that at least that you're hitting that right audience on Facebook as well, right? With the ads. So at least that you've got some confidence, on knowing that the audience you're building and created on Meta is relevant and you are hitting the right audience. So we talked about sort of you starting off with a kind of Apple search and then Twitter and then kind of adding in other channels. That was probably at a period before iOS kind of 14.5 came out and Apple search ads were somewhat reasonably priced. If you kind of had to do it all over again and you had that limited budget, how would you go about, and actually I think it's quite a relevant question for kind of where we are at the moment, because there's a lot of marketers out there who've had their budgets cut back given kind of sort of economic conditions. How would you kind of tackle the same problem again, given those changes with Apple and analytics and tracking?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm just sort of thinking how much that the marketing wasteland, I was going to call it, that seems a bit harsh, but how much the landscape, that's the word, how much the marketing landscape has changed in that time as well. And I think I would still look at Apple search ads as long as you can get the SK ad network, scan network bit set up, because we are edging back towards you kind of trusting Apple then to tell you how good Apple are doing by using their own system of attribution. But having that plugged into your MMP can still give that element of visibility. But another thing I say to that is to not, and to be honest, I never was, so this still rings true, is to not get too bogged down on the granularity of the data. I mean, as direct marketers, we absolutely love it, being able to track everything to the nth degree. But we also have a lot of skills in direct marketing, and we should be able to trust, your instinct sometimes in what things do work and what things don't work, and be able to interpret the data, even if it isn't complete to a level that you'd want, to assess how well things are working or not, and then feed that back into other areas. I think the other thing I'd probably change if I was to do it all again now is I would focus a lot more on elements of branding, which you can't necessarily track as much as you'd like to. But, the rise of influencers now is really important. And that's a big element that's changed in the landscape. Just being able to have some activity that is able to increase awareness of just the name of your app or what it does can really help when it comes to seeing a bit of direct paid placement, because it can just help give you that link of someone that's like, oh no, I saw someone talking about that, or I've seen that before. I'll give that a go. I think that's an important part, and to do that earlier on, then admittedly I probably start putting more focus into that area.
Is MoneyHub doing a lot of influencer marketing at the moment, or have you just sort of started to dabble into it?
We were doing some testing, so I would say sort of like late 2020, early 2021, and we were doing bits here and there where we've worked directly with smaller influencers, but then also via agencies. That has become a lot more consistent over the past 6 to 8 months, I'd say, where we're now working much more on a regular monthly basis with an agency to help with TikTok ads and creating content and driving content on there. But also have a content and communities manager in my team now who joined summer last year, who has really helped develop an influencer strategy we have in like the fintech community, especially on Instagram, starting out just, by engaging with their own content, having conversations, and then looking here and there to do some paid work together, sponsor events that they might be doing. And again, that's really helped and it's really come to fruition just this month gone. So what we're chatting at the start of February, but January we had a lot of activity that we all pulled together to capitalize on New Year's resolutions. A brilliant time of year to start thinking about your money management. That worked really well to give us a really strong month. So it's an important part of the mix now for sure.
How are you finding performance on TikTok? Because I think the results have been, I would probably say mixed. We've got some brands they can't get enough of it, and other ones who perhaps haven't gelled so nicely to it and have basically moved budgets back to Meta. How have you guys found it?
I'd say varied as well. Overall, I've seen it much more competitively priced than other channels like Meta. So I am still favouring TikTok ads as that. When I was talking about tier 1 platforms before, talking about Meta and TikTok, I thought like tier 2. It's probably a favoured tier 2 platform at the moment. The bids are definitely competitive, but it's really interesting to see the type of content the agency are helping us produce, and that's when I say it's quite varied. In terms of, you'd look at it and you think, oh, it's all kind, it is sort of fairly similar style. It's the camera talking about the product. Sometimes the app's in the background, over their shoulder, or they're talking about it or doing a little skit or anything. We haven't done a dance yet. There's been no MoneyHub dancing. And the variation between the creators is really interesting. So, like I said, we're going for a few months, and I think there's still more to learn there in terms of what type of creative on the TikTok platform is working for us. Because the most important thing is for it to be as native and as natural as possible, to appear in people's feeds. Like, for example, we don't have our own channel at all, so we are, we're completely relying on the content creators to get the message across, and that translate into downloads. And again, all integrated with an MMP, so I can see those effective registration costs and connection costs.
I see you've integrated the influencers with the MMP, have you?
We have, so via TikTok ads, we have.
Oh, right, okay.
So when they're I think it's called Spark Ads. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when they post the content and then we push it through the platform, the sort of Spark Ads, and that's all really. But we do give our influencers unique tracking links as well to use. Now, obviously, that's tricky on Instagram. We know you don't often get opportunity. It's got to be link in bio or whatever. So it's a lot more about looking for the halo effect when you're running this activity. But some of those influencers are getting really good results off those direct tracker links as well, using quite good methods of, for example, like DM us MoneyHub if you want to learn more, and then they'll just put the link out to people, and I can see all that activity tracked, and that's really interesting.
I mean, that's really interesting what you're saying about TikTok. One of the things that we face with our clients and even prospects is they know that they're getting a somewhat relatively consistent return or level of performance from their existing channels that they're using, and are somewhat reluctant to test out new channels. What's your kind of take on that?
I appreciate that there'll be companies out there with much bigger budgets than probably what I've been working with and have a lot of revenue going through these platforms. But I would come back to that point about if you become too reliant on certain platforms, you're never going to know what else is out there or what can gain you new audience. There was one mantra I came up with once about when I was looking at this in the context of like magazines, actually. So pulling it right back and how we typically would put our digital magazines out, directly onto those platforms themselves. But then there was also third party, like e-zine, that's the word, e-zine readers. So there was Zinio, Readly, people might more aware of now for like those digital magazine subscriptions. And there was a real hesitancy to even go near any of that. We wanted to have complete control on the channels that were working. Essentially, what I was trying to get to is that it's interception rather than interruption. Is that you don't know where all the time where your potential users are. I mean, that Facebook demographic's I know we've got Insta, but it's getting older and older, and people are shifting to other channels and other ways of like consuming information or want to learn about like new tools. And I think you have to be prepared to go there and to experiment there. And it's not to say that I'm getting everything right. I experimented with one channel, managed to, negotiate it down to a manageable amount within my budget for a 3-month test. And it was completely awful. And they thought it was fantastic and they wanted to carry on working with us. I was just like, there is no way that I can carry on operating at this level. It's just not getting me the installs and all those effective costs at a decent level. And that comes back to a bit about being, operating a very competitive fintech market, is that a lot of the time they'll think that you're like, regardless of how you try and explain what your app is and what you do, they think you're a crypto app or a trading app that can afford much higher CPAs because of the value proposition they have in their products. So that makes complete sense. But for an app like us, and I'm sure many other fintechs, there's no way we can sort of afford and operate at that kind of level. So you have to look at other, to come back to your question, you have to look at other channels to give yourself, the best chance, so to speak.
So we talked about sort of experimenting at sort of platform level. You talked a little bit about sort of different ad types for TikTok. What's Iain's playbook for experimentation? What levers are you trying to pull? Where do you kind of start off your experimentation, and kind of what does your process look like?
I always keep a record of everything that I've done in the past. So that forms like an appendix of the playbook. So that not that you're necessarily going to forget trying sort of any channels, but if you've tried anything similar before, how I went about it, what the results are, because again, not wanting to rely on certain other platforms all the time. Pretty analytical, keep a lot of stuff in history and in spreadsheets to look at it, split by device and any testing. So that probably always serves as a starting point when we're approaching any new channel. But then I'd have quite open discussion with the partner if you're able to do that. I mean, you can't do that with Facebook, can you? But a new channel in terms of what I'm looking for, thereabouts for an install, and again, the effective costs at the top of that funnel. And if there's something that we can work with that way, what has come out of that sometimes, which has been really good, is because if they say, oh yeah, we're integrated with so-and-so as well, so we'd happily run a test and we will only charge you when a customer connects their first account. And then I'm like, okay, that makes testing and doing this much easier, because I can get over that worry about paying for a load of installs, which aren't going to contribute anything to me, any fake user registrations, and we can focus on those users that come through, like all the way through that part of the funnel. I can probably then offer a higher effective cost per acquisition for that test that we're running. And then if it all proves successful, as it has done on a couple of channels in the past, when additional budget comes along and I need to pull some levers, I know the channels that I'm going to go to and do that. I can't always go headfirst into running like a continuous relationship. And again, being able to make that clear up front with any new sort of like potential partners has sort of been really key. And just selling the value of MoneyHub a lot of the time into them. Make sure that they download the app as well to check it out and get an understanding of it. So I think that's kind of the approach I take, and also be wary not to get pulled too far down the journey and not be afraid to like actually say, no, look, this is not going to work. Don't feel suddenly obliged to carry on and put this in place or set up a campaign. It's absolutely fine for you as the marketer, the owner of the product at that time, to say, no, actually, it's not the right time. But it's something, we can revisit later on.
It's a very, very common theme here amongst our guests and larger organizations and the successful organizations that we've interviewed. They're hugely data driven and advocates of tracking and analytics and having the infrastructure in place and then using that data to make informed decisions. The one thing that we haven't gone into, though, with any sort of previous guests is talking about how to use that data to scale. So kind of very sort of broadly, and it's a very, very broad question, but I think for performance, it's the perfect question for a performance marketer. How do you use data to scale? How do you leverage those data points that you're pulling in from your MMP and other tracking platforms to help you make decisions?
I may have alluded to it briefly before. I'm keeping a record of all that data and everything that I'm doing, so that when we're wanting to scale, we're planning the next campaign, we're looking at the month ahead, we're looking at the year ahead, or we do have more budget to work with, I'm able to really quickly go back and look at the variety of channels that we've been using and make those informed decisions about this is how we're going to run this campaign, the channels we're going to use, this is where we're going to place the extra budget for maximum effect. And obviously still keep a close eye on that, because things are always changing, and what might have worked a few months ago might not work as well now. But again, I'd probably say as well, for that growth path past the acquisition, obviously engagement is a huge part of driving that growth and keeping people like engaged in the product. And then the data that we have at MoneyHub, and one thing we say to our users, and this is the whole point, is taking control of your financial data, essentially having everything in one place and making your own informed decisions, is that we have all this data for our users that is then at their fingertips, which is a massive engagement driver anyway. And we have like actionable, insightful nudges within the product linked to what the user has set up, whether that's through budgets or certain rules for like alerts when balances drop below a certain amount on a certain account. That is that other side of being able to use that data to drive that growth, like internally, outside of like the acquisition side, of the campaigns. Because, like I say, it's giving that control back to the user to be able to really use it in insightful ways. And that just sort of helps accelerate it. And then you can have the whole element of, referrals and then mentioning this to other people and helping to drive that further. It's really powerful to have that alongside let's say, survey data as well, because having that coupled together can really help inform like the development of the product and where we want to improve certain features or make improvements to the app to make it an even stronger proposition and even more engaging, and to just keep that cycle going to drive things further.
We've talked a huge amount about sort of paid activity and performance marketing. I just want to touch very, very sort of briefly on your organic activity. So I don't know if you can divulge this, but how much of your acquisition is organic versus paid at MoneyHub?
It's easy for me to say before I started the paid, it was 100% organic. But then, obviously as that has developed, it varies a fair amount. What I always find really interesting, we mentioned it briefly, like the halo effect. So when you add in the additional elements of paid activity and you're tracking that as well as you can, because I know you can't capture everything, but that is where that halo effect comes in, because you have an organic baseline. And then when you're adding certain bits of activity in at certain times, you do get to see a clear correlation to these spikes in your organic line. For when I referenced January earlier, I was expecting, okay, we put a lot of plans in place there. We did a lot of paid activity, and we got that halo effect. So our organic split was even higher than it had been in the previous 12 months of the year. And then you get like a new baseline after that, which is the great part of it, is when you don't see it like completely drop off. So yeah, I know I haven't given you like an exact split there, but the organic base it's really important to keep a close eye on that and how it's performing.
Iain, it's been amazing, really kind of like diving into the intricacies of paid side of marketing here. Before we wrap up, I'd like to just take you through our quick fire round.
Infamous quick fire round.
Yeah, the infamous quick fire round. So, other than the FML podcast, what other podcasts are you listening to at the moment?
Do you know what? I listen to so many football podcasts, and it'll be so boring to reel them off. So, aside from them, I tend to listen to the Big Story by Ad Exchanger. Good roundup of like digital marketing more broadly every month, and I like the Conversation of Money podcast as well.
And, are there any books that you're reading at the moment or that you recommend?
I'm quite a slow reader, but one book I am reading at the moment is Ask Iwata, which is kind of words of wisdom for Satoru Iwata, the ex-Nintendo CEO.
Okay.
Who was kind of behind like the DS and the Wii and sort of laid the groundwork for Pokemon Go. And that's really interesting to sort of like see how he worked like in business and how he developed.
That sounds like it'd be quite interesting, actually. Other than MoneyHub, what's your favourite fintech app?
I really like what Sprive are doing with the mortgage overpayments. Again, I know they use, you've got the open banking connection to help facilitate that. But I think that's a smart concept. And then there's another app called Zedosh, when they kind of termed like the attention economy, and where people can earn coins for watching adverts, engaging with content, which again, it converts back into real cash for their account. And I think they're both really smart.
What's something that I haven't asked you that perhaps I should have asked you?
Where to download MoneyHub?
Tell us. Got to get the plug in, Iain. Tell us let's download it.
Yeah, there we go. Wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. Yeah, so you can download MoneyHub on Apple App Store and the Google Play Store in the UK. And we're also available on desktop at moneyhub.com/app.
And if you're going to search on any of those platforms, don't click the ad, because Iain doesn't need you eating up his budget. So.
Exactly. Just scroll down one or two and be part of that organic halo effect.
Iain, thank you very, very much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.